So the Superman movie is officially out now, and basically a lot of the things that I thought was going to happen in it happened as far as when it refers to Superman's character and the way that he's portrayed in there and the character archetype that he has. And it led me to make this video, of course, which is, as you can see by the title, about the death of the American paragon of virtue. And it's unfortunate that character archetype is gone. And what do I mean by paragon of virtue, and why is Superman no longer one, and why was he originally one? Well, the thing is, the paragon of virtue is meant to be something very different. A lot of people are very used to these new type of characters, which are called everyman characters. They're not necessarily new, but they're called everyman characters. And an everyman character is meant to be a character that you kind of understand, and they're really relatable. That's the whole point about it. That's why you have the classic idea of, a village or farm boy dreaming about greater and bigger things, and then he goes on an adventure. That's what is basically what every main character is like. And you see this in characters like, Harry Potter and Luke Skywalker, these characters who are basically the pinnacle of being an everyman. But at the end of their story, they become switch from being an everyman to becoming a paragon of virtue. A character that, again, has all the best virtuous parts, basically the perfect man, the ideal that everyone can strive towards, the shining light that is just the symbol of heroism. And basically, this is what a paragon of virtue is. So every main character is to believe they become a paragon of virtue at the end of their stories. That's why when you see these characters destroyed recently, the main problem people have with them is that they finished their arc. They feel like they are a paragon of virtue, and yet you come and grab these characters and bring them back down to the mud. Jake Skywalker, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, so on and so forth. But Superman was a paragon of virtue from the start. That's what he was. He was the man of tomorrow. He was, the truth, justice, and the American way. He was supposed to be perfect from the start. And he's not the only character like this. There are many other characters you can talk about who are like that. If you want to talk about Captain America from, Marvel, go overseas to Japan. You got, All Might. If you want to even go, even in Marvel, even deeper, you go for someone like Thor. That's the whole point of having Mjolnir and being worthy, is that he's a paragon of virtue. One last person I'll mention is someone like Uncle Iroh from the Avatar series. He's supposed to be a paragon of virtue, an absolute perfect person. And these characters are pretty common in stories, usually as a mentor character. As a main character, they're a little different. And also, sometimes Batman can be considered a paragon of virtue. Most certainly inside of, the Dark Knight series, for example. He's supposed to be a, immovable force, as Joker calls him. He's just will not bend his morals and become evil. Basically, he's unbreakable. And that's what makes these paragon of virtue characters so interesting, because they are unbreakable. And the best type of stories that can be told with those characters is stories about how the rest of the world tries to attack them. The way I always put it is, I do the line from The Dark Knight, where Harvey Dent says, you wanted us to be decent men in an indecent time. And basically, that's what a paragon of virtue is called to be. A paragon of virtue within the current day world is called to be a decent man in an indecent time. He's supposed to be a perfect man in a perfect world. And the world is constantly pushing and trying to make them not be perfect, trying to make them fall, trying to make them like everyone else. And they stay, their true perfect selves. They stand by their values. They stand by their morality. They may struggle to do so, but they always stand by it in the end. They always resist temptation in the end, and as a result, everyone else can look up to them and everyone else trusts them in a certain way. So that's what Superman's supposed to be. That's what Thor and the rest of the guys are supposed to be like. But of course, the video is titled the death of the American paragon, or rather, it's talking about the end of that paragon idea when it comes to Western storytelling. And the reason why I did this, because again, you see in this last 5 years, you've seen the destruction of each of these paragonic figures in almost every single medium. Captain America, from when it came to the comics, they tried to turn him into a Hydra agent, completely destroying his paragon status, and that lingers on even to now. Then inside of Endgame, they had him abandon his morals and go with Peggy Carter. Some people will take that as, he is taking, finally doing something for himself. But again, that kind of goes against the paragon of virtue status. The paragon of virtue is to be self-sacrificing to a fault. And so by doing that, he becomes no longer a paragon of virtue. He abandons the cause. He abandons his heroics and his heroism in order to pursue something that is more normal and more selfish. Again, it's a choice that you can say that, can be morally debated, but at the same time, you have to understand it is still breaking away from his base morality that he usually has. So that all on its own is kind of not that great. So you have Captain America falling off. We all know what happened to Thor. If you go from Ragnarok to Love and Thunder to Endgame, Thor has completely changed and being no longer a paragon of virtue, no longer being a stoic, worthy individual. You know, he's worthy. That's why probably why the worthiness of Mjolnir is no longer a big thing. In the past, it used to be a big thing. When someone lifted Mjolnir, you knew this was important. I mean, the reason why the Avengers even trusted Vision is because he could lift the hammer. So these types of really good paragon of virtues, again, Vision inside of the MCU was also one of these characters. These were so interesting ideas. But of course, with Thor becoming a much more destroyed character, becoming a frat bro, essentially, he's clearly not worthy of Mjolnir, even if he keeps on lifting it, which is why also no one really respects the worthiness enchantment anymore. And it's just also why, you know, you have someone like Jane Foster who lifts it up, and it's like, why not? Because again, this has no impact anymore. The worthiness enchantment is useless because if Thor can lift it, and Thor, who was clearly not worthy, Thor was clearly not a paragon of virtue in any way, shape, or form, then of course Jane can lift it. Anyone can lift it, really. Like, anyone can. I mean, it is pretty bad. And on top of that, now we finally have Superman. And Superman's fall from grace has been less, you know, huge in comparison to those guys. Less clear, less obvious, much more subtle. And the reason why it's much more subtle is because instead of, like, while Captain America turned in a way where, you know, he's abandoning his station, he's abandoning his duty in order to pursue a life on his own. It's a selfish choice, but it's understandable in a certain way. And for Thor, it's so obvious that everyone sees it, everyone knows it, and it's no reason to even like go against it. Everyone knows Thor's been destroyed. Even the actors talked about it, become a parody of himself. Like, everyone understands that Thor has been completely and utterly destroyed. But for Superman, and especially this new movie with him, people seem to not understand that he has been destroyed because he is still a good character in a different way, though. He's no longer a paragon of virtue, as I mentioned in my, you know, James Gunn doesn't understand Superman, and my You Don't Understand Superman videos. He's become an everyman character. He switched from being that character everyone respects. You know, I mentioned All Might before, but All Might again is Japanese, but still, I mean, how All Might is considered, you know, the hero. Everyone respects him. Everyone knows who he is. He is a perfect paragon of virtue, someone who does not waver from goodness. He is goodness in of itself. And then as Steel, you know, Superman was kind of like this, but he was much more brooding, much more. He didn't have the light that you wanted to have as a you know, a paragon of virtue. I think there's another YouTuber who said that. I think her name was Nerd Explains. I forget her name. I'll have to look it up. Nerdword, I think it is. I'll put her description, her video in the chat. Sorry, not her video, but her channel in the description. And what she said is that Man of Steel focuses on the super part too much. And while the new movies focuses on the man part too much, and I perfectly agree, his main thing about himself is that he's, you know, human, and he's human as far as in the flawed way. He's not human as far as in the incredible and beautiful parts of humanity. He does have those parts, don't get me wrong, but he at the same time has all the major flaws of it, and that's the main thing they really focus on. That's why he gets so angry. That's why I talked about the whole where's the dog scene is so huge, because it is Superman breaking, it is Superman going away from his morals, it is all that things. And again, you could argue that Superman has broken before in the past. I think Superman's a very hard character to write. A lot of people have talked about how hard of a character he is to write, because it is hard for them to write a character that is a decent man in a decent time. They don't like to do that for the most part. But again, this was just kind of the newest and the biggest part of it. This is just like a kind of a new idea to show him as an everyman. The fact that he's everyman now kind of overwrites what he was before. So like, I compare this to, everyone knows another movie that came out recently is How to Train Your Dragon. And How to Train Your Dragon, of course, is a complete destruction of the original, you know, book of where it comes from. The book it comes from, How to Train Your Dragon, you know, same title, is very different. It has some of the same characters, but those characters are vastly different when it comes to their journeys, when it comes to the stories they go on to. The dragons themselves are different. Just to give an example, you know, Toothless inside the movies, who's the DreamWorks movies, by the way. He is this massive, you know, black dragon with, you know, super massive powers called, like, I forget his last thing, like Nightbringer or something like that. Like, he is a very powerful dragon you can fly upon. While in the original source material, the book, he is this small, wimpy little dragon. Like, he's the size of a cat. He is, not only that, he can talk. Like, he can actually talk. He's the dragon language, and Toothless and Hiccup actually converse with each other. You know, Toothless is a much more selfish character. He's a completely different character than he is inside of the movie versions, both the animated and the other version of it. And the thing is, the reason why this is not as mentioned as much because, again, the movie did such a good job of making good characters. So even if the characters are different, they're still very well-loved characters. See, people only notice when a change has happened if the change itself is bad to the point in which the characters are bad, and then they can say the movie is bad. Why is it bad? Because they didn't follow the source material. But in this case, the new thing they did, the thing that they did to change it all up, is good. So how does this relate to Superman? Well, because the way they changed up the Superman, the character is still a good character. It's still a very solid character. He's just not Superman. So he's a solid, really good character, but again, he's not Superman. And people kind of have a hard time getting it together. Again, same thing happened with How to Train Your Dragon. People have a hard time understanding that while How to Train Your Dragon, both the animated and the live action movie, are really good characters, they're really good movies and pretty good stories, they're not the same as the book. The book, they're complete, destructions when it comes to compared to the book, compared to that. And a desecration, if you will. So there is a big difference. And then because the people can't really get that through is why they have a hard time understanding it. That's what I'm trying to get through here. Superman in this movie is a pretty solid character. However, he is not Superman. He is James Gunn Superman. He is a completely different interpretation of the character that completely abandons his roots, his Paragon of Virtue roots, completely abandons the idea that he kind of started with, which is why, again, you cannot consider him Superman. Or at least some people will consider him Superman regardless, but people will consider anything, to be honest with you. When it comes to actually substantiating why, the difference is, again, difference between being a Paragon and being a everyman. He's much more of an underdog. He has a much more build-up. He's much more human as far as the flawed version of humanity rather than the best of humanity. He is more man than he is super, essentially. And that's I would say it's a bit of a problem. I don't like when you have characters change up significantly like this. It's not because I don't like character journeys. I think that Paragons of Virtue are meant to have those character journeys in the same way that other characters are. They're unique in that way. But at the same time, again, as a writer, someone who's trying to write my own stories, an amateur writer, I would hate for someone to take my character, and then 70 years later, after I'm dead, basically change my character up to be someone completely opposite than what I wanted to make the character as. That's just my opinion on it. You guys can say what you guys want. I'd like to hear your opinion in the comment section down below, whether you agree or disagree and all that. Hit the like button, subscribe, for more content. And I'll see you guys in another video. Until then, guys, stay ferocious. Tiger back.